Am I the right person? I'm sure there are many other people in the country who do this job. I've been asked to do it, and I guess I've been asked to do it because I have a track record of doing these kind of things, and I'm a professor of law and have apparently served effectively in 2 or 3 dozen other inquiries that have led to a positive result. So that's for the public to judge.
David Johnston continues to face backlash for his role as special rapporteur on foreign interference, but in an opinion article in today's Globe and Mail, he says he's going to finish the job. Here's some of what he wrote. While I identified serious shortcomings in the way we respond to foreign interference, the work is not done, and I will not be dissuaded from completing it. My next guest says former governors general shouldn't be seen or heard from after their appointment is up. So what should the life of a former governor general look like? Philippe Lagassé is an associate professor of international affairs at Carleton University. Professor, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, David.
So David Johnston says he served Canada as Governor General. It was his intention to serve Canada as Special Rapporteur. Why should his ability to serve Canada end with his appointment as Governor General?
The office of Governor General is the second highest of the state. It's right under the monarch. It's really the pinnacle of the Canadian polity. And with that position comes a really important duty to be impartial, to be neutral, to be independent. And once that occurs, once you've held that position, you're expected, I would argue, to retire and enjoy the benefits of having had that office and never do anything that subsequently would call into question the core principles of that office, namely impartiality and independence. And more importantly, perhaps in this context, any sense that that office embroils itself in partisan politics or political controversies of the day. So really, when you have this office that is at the apex, effectively, of the Canadian state, that should be the end of the line. It should be a career-ending appointment, where after that, that is your final act of public service, and anything else you might do after that in the public domain risks diminishing the office that you previously held.
So how does David Johnston's decision to take on this role, I know he's been attacked and criticized by partisan actors quite significantly, but how does his decision to take on this role undermine his past work as Governor General, in your view?
So as Governor General, you're supposed to be above the political fray. You're supposed to be above the partisan fray. And Mr. Johnston, for all his honorable behavior, his past accomplishments, for his, and I'm not at all doubting his sincerity or his dedication to the task. Unfortunately, he's been dragged right down into the partisan muck. And he's finding himself having to defend his findings. He's having to make recommendations to political actors on what they should do next. He's coming very close to siding with one party over the other on what the next steps should be. And all that simply is contrary to the fundamental values and expectations that we place within governors general. And it's not, again, to diminish his ability to do it. I have no doubt of his ability. The question is whether or not he is living up to what one would expect of having somebody who was at the pinnacle of the Canadian state ultimately finding themselves mired in controversy.
But I wonder, is it realistic for all governors general to just retire and end when that appointment is over? Michaëlle Jean, for example, I think she was 53 when she finished her time in office, and you've got a long life ahead of you there, and a desire for purposeful, meaningful work. I mean, is it realistic for them to actually sort of retire and fade away when the appointment is over?
Well, what you're pointing at is one of the challenges that should surround the appointment of Governor General. You shouldn't pick somebody who, in the back of their mind, is thinking, what do I do after I'm Governor General? That's not a question that you should be asking of a candidate. That candidate, again, and it's not ageism, it's not that you can't pick younger people, but it's simply a function of the fact that this should be the last major public appointment you take on. Now, governors general are provided with money to set up foundations, charitable foundations. They can sit on private boards. They can do many other things. There are many other things that you can do. But why would one go from the second highest public office of the Canadian state to then take on a number of other appointments after that in the public domain? It's contrary to the spirit of the office. So yes, we shouldn't be appointing people who have to wonder or ask prime ministers, and we can get into Madame Jean if you'd like, but we shouldn't have former governor general hoping that the government of Canada will get them international appointments and things like that. That's inappropriate.
Right, so with Ms. Jean, for example, the francophonie is the issue you're talking about there. Is that where you're going with that?
Well, exactly. You shouldn't have to have former governor general hoping or looking for the prime minister, the government of the day, after they've left office, to find them other appointments. That casts doubt on their relationship with the government. They should be entirely impartial, entirely independent, not hoping that they will be done a favor or found something else to occupy their time afterwards. You want people that are ultimately going to be signing off from their public career after they hold that office.
I'm not sure David Johnston feels like the Prime Minister did him a favor by asking him to do this job, given the way it's gone over the past little while. But, you know, there's a limited number of people who you can credibly consider to be Governor General, and there's a limited number of people that can credibly be considered to navigate the thorny world of foreign interference and how to best combat it as a country and as a government. So if not someone like David Johnston, where do you go for an appointment like this? What would you recommend in a way that can get the job done and still be constitutionally and protocol-wise appropriate?
Well, there's a number of former heads of intelligence services, former chiefs of the defense staff, former deputy ministers, many people, I would argue, who would in fact be far better attuned to whether or not the intelligence process worked effectively, far better understanding of what is and is not disclosed or could not be disclosed in the public domain, people who would have a better sense of whether or not certain matters should have been briefed to the prime minister. Mm-hmm. So that we have a vast number of people in this country who are independent, who have served in the government, who have that experience, and who could comment on this. And just to make a point, when you look at our allies, some of these major reports in countries like Australia are given exactly to those people because they have the expertise in it. I'm not casting doubt on the ability of Mr. Johnston to do this. It's simply that there are other people with deep careers in this domain who would have been even better at assessing whether or not the intelligence was credible and whether or not the process was properly followed.
You know, your principled critique here aside, and the personal critique aside that he's received from a lot of the partisan actors on this, David Johnston seems determined to see this through. I mean, what would you recommend he do at this point? Do you think he should, even at this stage of it, step aside and let someone else take over? Do you think that's a viable option for him right now?
That's really up to him. And I know that he made this decision knowing full well the criticism that he would face, not only in terms of this aspect, what decision he might make, but also the perceived conflicts of interest that were raised. At this stage, if the government does follow his recommendation and not have a public inquiry and instead rely on his hearings, then perhaps he should see it through. Unfortunately, though, I really do hope that it doesn't cast a pale on the rest of the process. And as importantly, I hope it sets a real or provides a real lesson for future vice-regal office holders that this is not a path that they should go down.
Professor, always appreciate your time and insight. That's Philippe Lagassé of Carleton University. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, David.
I'll review the information and take this matter seriously and then provide solutions. Unlike Mr. Polyev, who thinks this is just a game, attacks without any sort of solution, unwilling to meet with people that are making decisions, unwilling to even look at the evidence. Unlike Mr. Trudeau, who's ignoring how serious this is.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is the only major opposition leader who wants to see the classified intelligence that led to David Johnston's decision not to hold a public inquiry into foreign interference. But Singh also wants assurances he'll be able to talk about whether or not he agrees with Johnston's decision. Meanwhile, a new poll from the Angus Reid Institute on the same topic this week found 52% of Canadians believe a public inquiry should have been called. 32% say it's not needed, and 16% are unsure. And when asked about whether David Johnston was the right person to lead the investigation, 22% said he was the right choice, but 32% said he was the wrong choice. 16% were undecided. The Power Panel is with me to talk about the week that was on the foreign interference front. Marie Vastel, Jason Markisoft, Emily Nicola, and Nigan Sinclair. So Marie, what's your take? I noticed in that poll, 52% want a public inquiry for Angus Reid. That's down from like the 72% we saw from Leger not that long ago. I don't know if that's a big shift. What's your take on where we are?
Or a different polling
methodology.
Firm. Yeah. It's still a little over half of Canadians who say that they would like a public inquiry. That poll also said that 63% of Canadians or respondents aren't confident that the Canadian government can combat foreign interference in future elections. Mr. Johnston's mandate was to increase Canadians' confidence in the government and its fight against foreign interference. And those numbers to me indicate that his mandate so far hasn't really worked.
Well, confidence in him is going down seems to be part of the problem, right?
Exactly. And so if he's tasked with increasing his confidence into the government's actions against foreign interference, it's not working. It's hard to explain the stubbornness of the government on this and of Mr. Johnston. No offense to Mr. Johnston, and I'm not putting into question his work as a Canadian, as a Governor General, but at a certain point, when people don't trust you to give them trust, you have to wonder if Mr. Johnston should just say, you know what, give the second part of my mandate to someone else, or if the Prime Minister should say, you know what, we will take his conclusions. Part of that is that the second part of his mandate is to look into structural problems with communications of sensitive information within government. Maybe we'll ask someone else to do that, someone else to do those public hearings. Or maybe, fine, we accept that there is no official public inquiry, but we still think that there should be some sort of judicial review of some sorts or some sort of independent mechanism to look into it. I don't see how things get better with these numbers and with the opposition parties and where they stand. And I mean, I say this every week, but this isn't just a political fight that we're seeing. It's a crisis in trust in government and in our institutions. And to me, those numbers, yeah, they might have gone down from another poll, but they are still pretty preoccupying.
Nigan, let's engage in a thought exercise, though. Who is this person that could lead this process, even in a public inquiry, that would satisfy Justin Trudeau, Pierre Poilievre, Jagmeet Singh, Yves-François Blanchet, the Globe and Mail editorial pages, the National Post editorial pages, and the Toronto Star editorial pages, and all the other editorial pages out there? Who is this magical unicorn that would step into this, given the assault we've seen on David Johnston, for example? Like, who is this person?
Well, he better not ski is probably the number one criteria.
So Steve Podborski's out. All right.
I'll tell you that, David Johnston's not going away. So it was almost like the thought experiment seems to be a good one, but it would really be a hypothetical at this point, because for David Johnston, this has turned into a legacy issue. You could see in the letter that he published with the Globe and Mail today that he said in the very end, I've done this for my entire life. My whole life has been for Canadians. I'm not leaving now. And he sees this next step. I think what he sees is the public hearings that he's suggesting on the information that can be shared with Canadians. I mean, if the rationale is that half of the information that he has that leads to the lack of supporting a public inquiry that he can't talk about, he's said, well, let's hold public hearings on the information we can hold about. And I mean, Susan Delacourt wrote a really interesting piece today in which she says is it better darn well be the best hearings ever held in history. Because what, not laying it out, not particularly, this better be something in which Canadians feel particularly appeased and further faith in David Johnston. Perhaps he's not the one to lead those hearings. If not, I mean, I can't see him stepping away. So the hypothetical would be, I don't actually have a magic unicorn. I don't think the unicorn really is going to come to fruition. I think David Johnston thinks that he might be the unicorn. The problem will be is that Canadians are losing faith over this entire process as a whole. And if you remember last week, we talked about why is Pierre Poilievre coming out and talking about this inquiry or talking about the call of David Johnston's role as being a joke from the beginning. Well, I mean, certainly we showed this week that it really doesn't matter if he reads the information or not. He's going to question the integrity of this process no matter what. And so that will always be there. It really doesn't matter how great these hearings are or even the second job that David Johnston will do.
Emily, is there a path forward here that is able to deal with the challenges spelled out? Because while a lot of people have talked about who David Johnston is and how close he was to the Trudeaus, he did identify some big structural and governance problems in how intelligence is done in this country and that need to be fixed fairly urgently. Is there a path forward to deal with the issue and satisfy the political climate at the same time?
No. I don't think so, because it depends. Not everybody is in agreement with what the issues are. For example, if we're talking about foreign intelligence and what the issues are. Yes, there's issues of communication, but there's also some concerns that have been, voiced by some key members of the Chinese Canadian communities who are concerned about a registry for foreign actors. Agents. Thank you. In Canada, and what might be the ways in which this could lead to abuse, like we've seen in the long history of marketism and whatnot in the United States and Canada. There's real worries about that, as well as worry coming from other parts of the Chinese Canadian communities of interference and from the Chinese government. So actually, some people are afraid of the Canadian government, some people are afraid of the Chinese government, but it seems like pretty much everyone is afraid. And so depending on who you're talking to, you're going to get a very, very different feel of what the solutions could look like. And so that's one thing that worries me in terms of trying to appease and make everyone agree on what's the best path forward. And the other thing that makes me a little bit worried is the fact that at this point, when you look at David Johnston's report, he's putting into question a lot of the reporting that came out from the Globe and Mail and Global News that led to this crisis, and this puts a lot of the newsrooms that are saying that this is bad, that this is a crisis in Canada, as both essentially their egos on the line right now, and they're defending their journalism. And so we cannot pretend, I think, as media at this point that we're kind of outside of the situation, just looking in and not looking at the ways in which we might have played a role in the current situation that we're in. And so that's, I think, elements that make it very unlikely that anyone could step in and replace David Johnston and do things differently. At the contrary, that him stepping down and someone else stepping in would be framed as another proof of the government's incompetence, and we would be in for another ride on this roller coaster that seems to be never ending.
Jason, I don't know with wildfires and the election if this has penetrated into the consciousness out there in a big way, but David Johnston felt the need to write an op-ed in the Globe today making the case for his decision to stay and saying he'll pull no punches during public hearings when identifying gaps in Canada's security infrastructure. I mean, is that enough? I mean, if the issue is people say he can't be trusted to do this, his critics, writing an op-ed, I'm not sure is going to change their minds.
I'm not sure either. I mean, to me, that was the less pertinent story that some Canadians may want to take from the Globe, even the last couple of days. The other one being that some of those very people who have been faced persecution from the Chinese state say they've already attended committee hearings at Parliament and don't want to repeat these things. There are risks to themselves and their families if they say these things. And in terms of David Johnston, if public opinion is low of him now, I wonder what it could be like after this June 6th hearing. I mean, he's he's somebody who likes to be above partisanship, above it all, honoring the call of duty from the public service. But that committee meeting is going to feed him through a partisan meat grinder. Hearing, when the Liberals try to play defense and the Conservatives, Bloc Québécois, and perhaps the NDP pull no punches. And, I think about other people who've had these kind of hot seat interviews before, Trudeau and other senior officials who are very politically minded, the Kielburgers during the Wee scandal, and they were public relations consulted up the wazoo. I'm not sure if Johnston is like that, and I'm not sure how well he'll come out looking after that when he faces all those punches, and I'm not sure what he comes out like afterwards. Yeah,
Marie's really going into the lion's den on that, because these committees have just gotten pretty punchy and partisan and aggressive as this has gone on, and I can't imagine he's going to get a pleasant welcome there.
No, and if you look at his press conference from Tuesday, he also tended to go into long answers, which don't really work in committee.
Nope.
He went into a long explanation of his relationship with the Prime Minister, which I'm not sure helped that much. Remains to be seen. So I don't know how he'll fare in that setting. I agree with Jason. And then just to circle back on his work, I think the issue is that he has valid questions and conclusions on what to do next. The structural problem, the organizational problems between CSIS and the government ministers or departments. But the problem is in people's minds, the first part isn't done yet. They are not satisfied that he tells them he saw intelligence and everything is fine. They want transparency. Granted, it cannot be given to the extent that people want, but I think that's part of the issue, is that Mr. Johnston wants to move on to part 2, but people are still on part 1, and they are still worried about what happened, what was said, who knew what, and who did what.
But Nigan, on that point, I know Mr. Blanchet and Mr. Poilievre are not going to take up the offer to see the intelligence, but NSI-COP, which has 2 Conservatives and a Bloc Québécois MP on it, they can review this and they can put out a report saying, yeah, we agree with him, or no, we don't. And it feels like that's an important piece, right? Them and NSIRA can do this review and say whether or not his arguments hold water. That seems like something that should be done pretty quickly and to bring some clarity to this.
Yeah, let's just for a moment talk about why Blanchet and Poilievre, other than the fact that they can use all the skiing buddy terms, or the Justin Trudeau's buddy, to describe David Johnston as much as you want, but why would they read the report? And that's the big question I think the public should ask themselves, because if they do read the report, then all of their options for criticizing it is really closed, unless they start to share the information, which of course, while they would be protected in Parliament, would be a very unfavorable move to talk about what they had read within the report. So there really is no political win for them to read the report, other than to say, be an adult, be responsible, be, I mean, we're talking about politics here. And so the real Hail Mary for David Johnston is these 2 statutory oversight committees. One is going to be made up of parliamentarians, the other one of national security experts. And as you mentioned, there are members of those parties, of Poilievre and Blanchet's parties, on those committees. If it comes out that the members of these committees do see the report and either sign off or don't come out, flipping tables, what does that say? What does it say in which I think that's a win for David Johnston? At least it is the one that I think he's banking on. He keeps talking about it, talked about it in the letter for the Globe and Mail today. I mean, he did right at the top of the letter, said that is the number one thing. And when he did the media rounds, that is the number one thing, after explaining this nonsensical explanation of how his daughter skied with Trudeau. Then he moved on to saying, well, this is where Canadians will have an opportunity to read my report. So this is where all of his eggs is in this basket. I guess it has a matter to see what will happen next when it comes to those two
So Emily, just as a final point, can a verdict from NSI-COP and NSIRA, can that settle the question on David Johnston's credibility? Because that is a committee with all the parties on it, at least the one of parliamentarians.
Yeah, I think it would really help the matter, because people are saying this as essentially everybody's being partisan. So if you the only way out, going back to our earlier question of who would be the best person, I don't think there would be a best person, but the best makeup of people to put this behind us would be if there was some sort of cross-partisan consensus on, okay, this is what we think is the best way forward. So Jagmeet Singh agreeing to step in is good. The committee looking at that it is good. I do think that there is moments in politics where it just looks bad on you, especially in hindsight. It just doesn't age well to be playing partisan politics over things like the integrity of our democratic system. And I do hope that maybe if Yves-François Blanchet, at the very least, changes his opinion eventually because of what his MP will have told him or not, that might help. But if we're starting to see movements in some of the leaders of opposition parties, you might start to then have the focus put back on actually sometimes the journalism that led to this, right, or on CSIS. And so I don't think it would end the crisis, but it would maybe put the pressure on, what happened that went wrong and what can we do to move forward.